I'm Naki Mendoza, and I'm inside the Casa de la Cultura Convention Center in Quito, Ecuador, which for the past 4 days has been the central hub of activities for the Habitat 3 Summit, the premier global forum for sustainable urbanization. It is a vastly different world and a much more urbanized world since the last Habitat Summit in 1996. Today, more than half the world's population lives in urban areas. By 2030, before the next Habitat gathering, it's expected that 70% of the world's population will live in cities. There's an understanding that the future of sustainable development at large, sustainable global development, really hinges on how cities themselves develop. This is a large and packed event. It's estimated that 45,000 participants have attended. The lines are long, the sessions are crowded, and the rooms have tended to be quite hot. Officially, national delegates from UN member states have just finished adopting the new urban agenda. It's the document around which pretty much this entire event has been organized. It's a framework document of commitments by governments to sustainably urbanize. The questions, of course, are how to go about doing that. I'd say that several themes have stood out from the past 4 days about how countries should go about implementing the new urban agenda. First, any solution really needs to be locally driven. Mayors, local officials, they really are in the driver's seat. It's up to them to devise and promote solutions from the bottom up. That is, take into account services that serve their citizens and then seek the resources and the assistance to implement them from central or regional governments that sit one level above them. Second, there's been a lot of talk about integrated approaches and holistic approaches to urban planning. Those are somewhat fancy terms to mean that any individual product that solves one specific objective is sort of a thing of the past. Any project or intervention in a city needs to take into consideration a range of issues. For example, a new bus line shouldn't just be seen as a transportation issue. It should also be seen as an environmental issue based on the type of fuel source that's procured, or an economic issue based on the income levels of the different neighborhoods that the bus line connects in the city, or a gender security issue based on the location and the isolation of some of the bus stops. There's been a lot of discussion about taking the long view on investments and how that tends to somewhat mismatch with shorter-term political cycles. A lot of it comes down to political will of elected officials and them needing to take a long view on issues. Donors, financiers, and bankers have all said at some point in this conference that one of the biggest obstacles that they face in funding projects are the short-term returns that the projects tend to seek. Finally is the issue of finance. Who's going to pay for all these urban renovations? Conversations have been less about who than how. The money is there, it's widely said. The question is how to create the incentives to get that money to flow. That often comes down to improving the borrowing conditions for local governments, boosting transparency of public finances, for example, or registering land and formalizing land titles so that municipalities more formally have assets on their books. Perhaps the biggest obstacle, or the question mark, is how incentivized and committed governments are to what's laid out in the new urban agenda. Unlike the Paris Climate Agreement, for example, the new urban agenda is non-legally binding. So accountability and follow-through mechanisms really are central. But so far, there have been no formal monitoring and evaluation systems that have been formally adopted.